Okay, everyone, enjoy this. I love this video. If you ever get stressed out, you can go watch this video. It'll calm you right down. I don't know why we started getting advertisements there, but that's okay. So what I love to invite you all into is just really presence the miraculous nature of seed starting and watching seeds grow. It really, I don't know how many seeds I've started in my lifetime, but I'm gonna guess that it's somewhere in the realm of like tens of thousands. And every time I see a seed germinate, I almost honestly freak out with the whole miraculous nature of it, that somehow there's this little packet of energy and inside there is everything that is needed to grow a plant or a tree. And I really just find the experience of seed starting to really keep me in touch with all that is sort of wonderful and curious and joyful in the world. So I hope that it offers that for you as well. I'm now going to start sharing my PowerPoint again, and we're going to go into the nitty-gritty. Okay, so yeah, seeds are magical little packets of life. They really are. So we're going to go through 5 categories of different types of seed sowing today. So just want you to be able to wrap your head around the sort of 5 categories. So in the middle, if it starts to feel like this is a lot, just remember there's 5 types. So we're going to talk about crops that are raised in the cold, so cool crops. They prefer the spring and the fall. And they're direct seeded. So when we say direct seeded, these are things where you just take the seed and you put it right into the earth. You're not going to plant it in a pot first. It's going to go right into the ground. So we're going to talk about direct seeded cool crops. We're going to talk about transplanted cool crops. We're going to talk about direct seeded warm crops and transplanted warm crops. And then finally, we're going to talk about a 5th category called succession crops and direct seeding those. And I'll explain what those are when we get to them. So those are the 5 categories. So you can just think about sort of direct seeded and transplanted and cool and warm. And so you can wrap your head around that. Okay, so for those of you who are able to bring a seed packet, grab your seed packet. If you don't have a seed packet, it's no problem. I've got one here for you on the screen. And everybody's seed packet, just to confuse you, everybody's seed packet is going to look totally different and have totally different information on it. I don't know why they don't standardize this, but they don't. And so some of you may notice that your seed packet looks different. So the one you see on the screen is from a company called High Mowing Seeds up in northern Vermont. And then the one I'm holding up for you here is from Fruition Seeds. They're our local seed company in Naples, New York. And so you can have a seed packets that come from all over the place. So the first thing I would invite you to do, if you do have a seed packet, or you can look at mine on the screen, is to figure out where your seed company is located. And so that's always a helpful thing. It's usually on there, and it's not always on there. So in the case of mine, I'm finding on the back of the seed packet a spot that says Naples, New York. And you might be asking, like, Jenny, why is that important? Why do I care where the seed company is located? And I'll tell you, the reason that you might care has to do with whether or not those seeds are adapted for your region. So every region that we have in the country has different growing conditions. And as those of us who live in upstate New York know, you can have different weather in the west side of Ithaca versus the east side of Ithaca. And so as we broaden our scope, a geographic scope, things get more and more different geology, different soils, different climates, different rain patterns, and all of those affect the plants that are growing there. So in an ideal world, we are using seeds that are grown in an environment that is the most similar to our garden, which is why we all encourage you, when you feel ready for this, to save your own seeds from your garden, and we'll teach you how to do that sometime. So look on your packet, see if you can figure out where it's from. Another thing I'd like you to look at is, and actually I'm going to go to the next slide because I've got some more tips on there about it, is I'm going to ask you to look for, there could be language on the front of your packet, depending on where it's from, that might say something like open pollinated, it might say heirloom, it might say hybrid. It's going to tell you something about the breeding system of your plants. And some of you may find that and some of you may not. If you find it and you want to type something about that into the chat, you can. You don't have to. And it might be on the front of your packet, it might be on the back of your packet. You can kind of look around until you see something. So, and I'm going to explain what a couple of these are because they can really confuse people. So the packet you see up there, that says open pollinated. What open pollinated means is that basically that they are not using any type of hand pollination in order to breed that seed. So it's being pollinated either by the wind or by bees. It's very random. So when seed breeders are trying to breed something, one thing that they might do is say, let's just say they have a carrot and they're like, ooh, I really like the color purple. I want to breed a purple carrot, but these purple carrots taste awful. So I also want my purple carrot to be sweet. So what they would do in that case is they would go and they would find a flower of a carrot that was very sweet and another flower of a carrot that was purple, and they would start breeding those together just by rubbing them together or using a paintbrush to transfer the pollen. And that's a process called hybridization. And that's a really great way in order to create new varieties. Now, some of you may have, I know some folks have concerns about genetically modified organisms, and I just want to clarify that when something is hybridized, that's very different than genetically modified organisms, GMOs. GMOs are actually not available at all in any way, shape, or form for sale to the public. So you don't have to ever worry that a seed packet you've bought is GMOs. That's actually not even legal to be done. So when you see something that's open pollinated, that means that it has just not been hybridized. What's really nice about open pollinated varieties is they often tend to have more diversity. And then also you can save the seed from an open pollinated variety. Whereas from a hybridized variety, if you save the seed, you won't always get the same thing as what you planted. So some people are really like certain open pollinated varieties, and some people don't mind hybrids at all. I have certain things where I really like to use certain hybrids. The cool thing about hybrids is sometimes there are things that they can add into increase in the genetics of something just by hybridizing. For example, disease resistance. So a lot of us have dealt with tomato blight, for example. Well, one of the ways that we can reduce blight in our tomatoes is by finding blight resistant varieties and crossing them with varieties that maybe don't have as much blight resistance. So sometimes you'll use a hybrid to get some sort of trait that you didn't have as strongly in the natural population. So, so some of you may see that on yours. Others may see hybrid. I'm going to look and see what mine says. Mine does not say any of those. But another phrase you might see on there is heirloom, and we get a lot of questions about what's an heirloom. Now, a lot of folks think that an heirloom has to be open pollinated. An heirloom actually doesn't have to be open pollinated. An heirloom literally just means any variety that's been available for use for over 50 years. So it's kind of like a status symbol of this is a variety that sort of stood the test of time. And so now we do have some hybrids that are over 50 years old. So even, I'm just trying to think, I don't think Sun Gold is a 50-year-old one yet, but there are some varieties of things. I'd be curious to know how old Sun Gold tomatoes are. They're probably not that old, but there are some hybrids that have now been on the market for 50 years. And so that's all that an heirloom means. It's really nice to keep heirlooms around. A lot of heirlooms do have a sort of a story, a cultural history to them that has significance either for a certain population of people or a region. And so we really like to promote heirlooms, and often heirlooms because they've been around for so long, they're really great performers. Another thing you might find on your seed packet is somewhere, well, I hope you find this on your seed packet somewhere, is the number of days to harvest. So look around on your packet, or you can look on mine that I have right up here. And you can see it's right here on this packet. It says 85 days to maturity. The one that I'm looking at here says, let's see if I can find it. Well, this one's really interesting. So I'm holding a kale packet. And if you look at mine, you guys can't see down here, but mine says 8 days to microgreens, 25 days to baby leaf, and 50 days to full size. So some things like kale, you could harvest a kale when it's a little microgreen, like the fancy little salad greens, or you can wait till it's a little bit bigger salad greens, or you can wait till you have a giant kale plant. So there's 3 different options. That's a piece of information you're really gonna wanna know, is the number of days to harvest, and we'll talk about later why that is. Some other information you might find either on the back or somewhere is the number of days to germination. And I think that I'll go back a slide because I have the back of the packet here. So in this packet that I'm showing you on my screen, you'll see that to the very right of the side of the packet, there's sort of a sideways little bar, a little graph there, a little spreadsheet almost. And on that sideways spreadsheet, you'll see the third column in says days to germination. Yeah, Mila's showing you hers. I've got a teeny tiny little one you can see up here. And days to germination is really important thing to know when you're starting seeds. So germination is just when a seed breaks dormancy and the root starts to emerge and the youngest leaves start to emerge. And in this case, the one you're looking at on the screen says 7 to 20 days to germination. Well, that's quite a range, 7 to 20 days. One of the reasons we really want to know how long something takes to germinate is we kind of need to know whether or not it's actually working. So if you, for example, see that you have something that's like in the case of my kale, it's 3 to 8 days to germination. Let's say I start these seeds inside, maybe the seeds are a little old, or I kept them in a hot place in my garage and I'm not sure, excuse me, if they're still any good anymore. And I want to know if it's working, right? Well, if I keep track of what day I've started and 8 days have passed and nothing's germinated, I know it didn't work and I need to start over. And so that's a really important thing, I think, to be able to pay attention to. Another piece of information you might see on there is whether or not you should direct seed or transplant your seeds. And so you might look on your packet and see if it explains that. And often they'll give some sort of growing instructions in some way. You'll see the packet on the front that on my screen says planting tips. The one that I'm holding here says growing instructions. Some packets, some seed companies don't provide any of this information for you, which frustrates Mila and I to no end when they don't put that information on the seed packet. If that's the case, what I encourage you to do is then either go to their website or go to the seed catalog. Those often have a lot more information. And then if you can't find the information at the seed company that you ordered it from, go to a different seed company and look for that same variety on their website in their catalog, and you'll probably find the growing instructions. But if you're like Mila and I, we kind of don't even like to order from companies that don't provide the growing instructions because it drives us bonkers. So in my case, this gives me instructions on kale on how to direct seed and how to transplant. And what you'll find as we're going through the slideshow is that there are some crops that you can use direct seeding and transplanting. Some you only want to direct seed, and some you only want to transplant. And don't worry, I'm going to tell you who's who and which is which as we move through the slideshow. Let's see, other information you're going to see on there that you really need to know is how far apart to plant your seeds. So you'll notice, at least on the packet on the screen, the second column on that little bar thing says seed spacing, and it says 30 to 40 seeds per foot. So carrots are teeny tiny little things. They can get planted pretty close together. But then also, if you look at the fourth column, it tells you the plant spacing after thinning. So in the case of carrots, a lot of times we'll pull out some of the baby seedlings, and once they've started growing and we can see who's strong, we'll thin it down to 1 carrot every inch or so. I tend to keep mine a little closer together than that. And actually, some people don't like to thin their carrots at all. So these are all sorts of information that are going to be on your seed packet. What I'll tell you is the farther away your seed packet is from where you live, or the less similar the environment is where these seeds were grown as your garden, the less relevant the information on the seed packet will be to you. So for example, if we have, you know, something that was bred in California and they say that it can grow to maturity in 58 days, well, what do you think that's going to do in upstate New York? We're definitely no California, thank goodness, right? But we all have to be really, really aware of the fact that the place that your seeds are from will make a difference on how relevant this information is to you. I think that's all I'm going to tell you about your seed packets for now, unless there's something you want to add, Mila. Let me unmute you. Hold on.
There we go.
Oh, there you go.
There we go. Often your seed packet will have a date on it.
Yes, thank you.
Let's see. I don't know if you can see mine or mine here. It says packed by or
for 2020. Yep.
So by 12/31/2020. So packed for 2020. So this is a brand new seed packet that I just picked up recently, also from High Mowing. This one, let's see, that doesn't even say it on it. Oh, this one is a couple years older. It's packed by 11/18. So seeds do have a life expectancy. A lot of seeds can stick around for many, many years, but a handful of seeds, once they start to get a little older, don't have the same kind of vibrant germination rate than if they were new seeds. So we did have another question about age of seed. We'll get into that probably a little bit later.
Yep. Yeah. And in general, when you go to the store, they can only sell seeds in the store that have been packed for the year that you are purchasing them. So the store will, if you bought it this year, will always say packed for 2020. Those will have the highest germination rates. If you are coming and getting free seeds from us, for example, at our seed cabinet, which doesn't have any more seeds in it right now, then those seeds are all going to be, those have all been donated by seed companies, and they are all from at least a year older, if not a little bit older than that. So every year that goes by, your seeds will have a lower and lower germination rate. So that's something to be aware of, especially if you are using older seeds, that sometimes you'll want to seed them a little heavier than if you're working with new seeds. Okay, we're going to keep going. Okay, look at that. I even had a picture of this chart. I forgot I put that in there. So this is an example of a chart that you'll find on the back of a lot of seed packets, and it's really, really helpful, giving you information about planting depth, seed spacing, how long till germination, how long, how much to space them, and also how tall they're going to get. Okay, so before we move on to our next set of slides, I'd love to pause and offer you a chance to ask some questions. We'll probably take 3 or 4 questions before we move on.
So Jenny, we have a couple of questions about older seed.
Okay.
So one thing we might want to do is spend a little time talking about how to do a germination test.
Sure. Yeah, if you want to do a germination test, you can. Do you want to talk about it, Mila? Because it sounds like I never do germination tests, but it's probably a good idea. It's like
it's funny. I rarely do either, and usually it's because a single seed packet has way more seed than I'm going to grow for my family in one year. If I was a farmer and I was depending on these seeds for my livelihood, I'd probably take it a little more seriously. Mm-hmm. But because I know that inside this kale packet, there's probably, I don't know, 200-300 seeds, I'm okay if a few of them don't come up. So I don't worry about it too much. But if you do have older seed and you want to test it out, you can do a germination test where you just take a couple of seeds and you test them out. You put like maybe 5 or 6 seeds out. I'll often do that on when I wanted something like this on a wet napkin. And you keep that, you put the seeds down, you moisten the napkin, I'll fold it over, and I'll put it in a warm spot, and I'll check it every couple of days to see if anything is germinated. If nothing comes up, I know my seed's a little too old. If after a few days I can see a little bit of movement, I can see the beginnings of that seed coat starting to crack open, I know that the seed is viable.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and I'll speak a little bit to longevity in your seeds. So it depends on each sort of species of seed lasts different amounts of time. So I've germinated tomatoes that were upwards of 15 years old without a problem before. Whereas onion and leek seed and parsnip seed, you can only grow that the year you bought it. After that, it's no good. And if you need to know about that kind of thing, if you just Google how long do seeds last, you'll find all sorts of charts put out there by the different seed companies. And what I found is they're always being conservative, and I can usually get a little bit more time. The key is how you store your seeds. And so I'll just show you. Let's see if you can see this. I don't even know if I can see that you can see this. Hold on. Okay, so here is one of my seed bins. You'll see I'm very, my little label maker thing. So I store my seeds in bins like this. So they're in their packets, and then they're in a bin like this. And then ideally you would keep this in a place that is somewhere in the 35 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit range with no humidity. So humidity is the enemy of the seed unless you want that seed to rot or germinate. And so by storing it in plastic or a sealed glass mason jar, that's a great way to keep moisture out. Some people will even save those little desiccant packets from pill bottles and other things like that and dry those out and put them in with their seeds. So basically, we don't want any moisture coming anywhere near our seeds. And then also heat is damaging to seeds. So a lot of people will, keep their seeds in their garage in the middle of summer. Well, that is just not where you want your seeds. You want to get it if you have a cool basement that's not too moist, of course, then, or something like that, someplace cold. Sometimes people like to keep their seeds in the refrigerator. That may be for you your only option. The problem with refrigerators is they're quite humid. So if you are using your refrigerator, you want it to have a totally airtight container before it goes in there. And this, I'm holding this up as if this is airtight. This is not airtight. And so that's what I like to do. But yeah, the cooler, the better. And that will increase the longevity of your seed. So any other questions we should field now, Mila? Okay, then let's keep going. All right, so let's talk about some of the materials you're going to want to have for starting seeds. And we're going to come back around to this at the end also. So the first thing you're going to want is a good seed starting soil mix. Now, you'll find if you go to the nursery or to the garden store, or Agware, wherever you'd like to go, a lot of choices. And here's what I'll tell you is sometimes what you'll notice is seed starting mix that's specifically for seed starting is quite a bit more expensive than regular potting soil. So a lot of people will ask the question, do I really need to buy the expensive seed starting mix? And the answer is yes and no. And so if you buy the expensive seed starting mix, what I can tell you is you will have more success with seed starting because that is what that mix is created for. And so it has a little bit lighter composition. It holds water well, but not as much as regular potting soil. And what's great about that is soil that is too wet is the enemy of a little baby seedling. Little baby seedlings love to get a disease complex we call damping off. It's basically created by too much moisture, creating this fungal mixture in the soil that will kill your seedlings instantly. And if you don't have soil that dries out fast enough, you can get what's called damping off. So by using just a regular old potting soil, you do increase your chances of getting damping off. That being said, I will admit that I often use regular old potting soil. I also will often buy a bag of the fancy seed starting mix. Sometimes I even mix the two. But technically speaking, seed starting mix is a little lighter and fluffier and a little better for working with. And the next thing you're going to want is a tub to put your potting mix in. And I'm going to show you all this in a little while after we finish the slideshow. I'm going to do a little hands-on over Zoom demonstration. So you're going to want some sort of tub. The other thing you want is a jug of warm water. So you can use cold water if you want to. You're the one who's going to be sticking your hands in there. But then also you're going to stick your seeds in there eventually. So the warm water is nice for you. It's nice for your seeds. If you're doing it on a really large scale outside, and your tub is your wheelbarrow and your hose is what you're using for water, then maybe warm water is not going to be accessible. But if you're able to use warm water, your hands will thank you, and so will your seeds. Oops. Then, of course, you need your seeds. And what I'll tell you now, since you are all here, if you don't have seeds yet, I encourage you, if you're ordering seeds from one of the seed companies, to place your orders as soon as humanly possible. The great news is you're not the only people that got excited about gardening for the first time this year. The world is being seized by gardening, and I couldn't be more happy about it. But what we've heard from the seed companies is they're getting triple the amount of orders that they usually get, and which is absolutely fantastic. but you'll want to get your orders in soon because they may start to run out of certain things that are popular, and also shipping is taking longer with, as with everything, shipping is taking longer right now. And so another thing we're going to talk about at some point is all these different, you're going to need something to plant your seeds in. So you're going to need some sort of thing to contain soil. And I'm going to introduce you, I'll stand up for a second and grab this, at some point to one of my favorite tools. This is called a soil blocker.
Hey, Jennie, I'm gonna pause you for a second, because a lot of the people who are seeing you only see your PowerPoint. So unshare your screen for a moment when you're doing anything where you want them to see what's in your hand.
Okay, thank you for saying that, Mila. You know what? Well, I'll show you the soil blocker later. You'll see it in a minute when we stop the PowerPoint entirely. So you're going to need something to put your seeds in. You're also going to need a tray underneath at the bottom to catch your water. And you're going to need to label your seedlings. And every time I think, I'll remember what's what, I don't need to label this, I forget every single time. And I have a really good memory. So don't ever think you won't, well, you'll remember, you won't. And you're also going to need some sort of waterproof marker or a pencil. So this is sort of your supply list that you'll need. There may even be one more thing on there. Let's see. Nope. Okay. So let's go through some seed starting tips. We'll come back to that supply list again when I give you a demonstration. So this is actually a graphic that we've used with permission from our friends at Fruition Seeds. Fruition Seeds is an amazing local seed company. They also have, if you get really excited by this class, they have something they call the Seed Starting Academy. And it's not interactive like this. You're just watching a series of videos. But I think they're offering it for free right now. So I really encourage you to go take it. So they set 7 essential tips. And this is, I would say, beginner's error number 1 is resist starting everything all at once. So one of the things that happens is, especially here in upstate New York, at some time right around April 1st, where we are now, all of us are starving for green things. We just want winter to be over and spring to arrive. And it's very tempting to just take all your seeds out and just start them. But the trick is, for healthy seedlings, timing is everything. Seedlings that are started too early get really big and what we call really leggy. So that means they end up tall and stringy, and they're really, really wimpy when you go to put them outside. We want seedlings that are short and stout and strong when you put them outside, and oftentimes those are seeds that have not been growing quite as long. So resist starting everything all at once. Starting seeds at the right time. If you start seeds too early, you're actually creating a whole bunch of work for yourself, because what's going to happen is you're going to start them and they're going to grow bigger and bigger and bigger, and they're going to get so big that you're going to need to put them in a bigger pot. The other thing that happens is that your plants are going to be a little bit stressed. When you put a stressed plant in the ground, it never does well. It's really tempting to sometimes be like, oh, this will be fine. It looks a little floppy right now, but a little sunlight and a little water and it'll be just fine. You know, it really won't. It's just like we think of with babies. We want them to start life with good health, and in good health leads to good health. Good health when you're young leads to good health when you're older. And it's the same thing with plants. And so if a plant is stressed, you're just not going to get the harvest that you would. And especially if you have a small garden, that can be a real bummer, because this plant, for example, let's say you put a stressed tomato plant and it stays in the ground for 3 months maybe, but you don't get a lot of tomatoes because that plant was so stressed when you put it in when it was little. Well, that really was a big waste of that space in your garden. So really avoid planting things too early. Plants that are at the right time, just way less work, way less stress, and a healthy seedling leads to more abundance. Okay, we're going to talk about this later, but if you have an option to use a soil block or a seedlings container with a bigger volume, they're just really, really wonderful, because you can get in a bigger cell tray or in a bigger soil block, you can get more soil and more nutrients in that volume that your soil is sitting in. And so Mila and I will talk a little bit later about why we really don't ever want you to start your seeds in egg cartons. And this has to do with this. So one thing that happens is, as your seedlings are growing, you see this image here of a little seedling with all these roots. The roots really need to be able to spread out in the pot. And if they aren't able to spread out, they're going to do what you see in this bottom picture, which is where they start making circles around the pot, We sometimes call that getting pot bound or cell bound or root bound. And that's really stressful for a plant. And you can imagine if they start going in circles, and then you go and put them in the ground, and now all of a sudden they're supposed to realize, no, now not supposed to go in circles anymore. Now I'm supposed to grow down or grow out. That's just not in their programming. They've already gotten programmed to grow roots in a circle. So having a way that you can have a large volume of soil for your seedling is really important. Now we'll talk later when we're talking about selecting cell size. There is such a thing as too large, and we'll talk about why that is in a little bit. Okay, another thing when you're going to want to do, a big tip is when you're planting your seedlings, you want to make sure that there are no air gaps. So if you have, when you're planting your soil, and I'll show you this when I demonstrate again later. Of course, if we were all in the same room together, I would be demonstrating at the same time as we're doing our slideshow, but this is one of the hazards of having to do this technologically. We're going to do the slideshow first, and then I'm going to show you everything afterward. But basically, when you have air gaps in your soil, that is a place where anytime a root is touching an air gap, that is going to dry, the air gap is going to dry it out. And a dried out root means an unhappy plant. So we really, really, really want to make sure that we don't have air gaps in the soil. Another thing we're going to show you later is about having a heat mat. Now, some of you are just not going to have this as an option, and that's totally fine. You can totally grow seedlings without a heat mat. But once you have used a heat mat before, you'll kind of wonder why you never did in the past. Mila's going to show you later a little technique she has for getting around the heat mat technique that's just absolutely awesome. But one thing is, a warm place, you're going to get much more consistent germination. It's going to go faster. And so the one trick though with when you're using a heat mat or any place where you have a heat source underneath your plants is the soil will dry out really quickly, and that can mean death for your seedlings. So you want to make sure to always be keeping your soil moist. Another thing for you is always to know is light is life for plants, right? That's how they get their energy. So now this slide is telling, fruition seeds cells grow light. So they would also love for you to buy a grow light. And certainly if you get to the point in your gardening and your financial stability that you want to invest in a old compact, old fluorescent shop lights or anything like that, or big fancy lights, they definitely make it easier to grow seedlings. But really all you need is a really great window, preferably a south-facing or a west-facing window. And you can put your seedlings in there and they're going to get plenty of light. One thing you want to know is if you're using a light a window to start your seedlings, the ideal thing would be if you rotate those seedlings every day. So they'll face one direction and they'll start to grow, because plants are programmed. They have what's called phototropism. They're going to grow toward the light. Well, we want our plants to grow straight up. So they're going to start to grow toward the light. If you can even, like I sometimes use, when I used to do this, I would actually just, every day I would rotate them after lunch, and I would just turn them around. It'd be like part of cleaning up from lunch. I rotate my seed starts and then I'd go back to my day. And then the next day I would have them face the other direction in the morning and rotate them again in the afternoon. Okay, another thing about your seedlings, another little tip to know is healthy seedlings are short and stout. So it's very, very tempting when you see seedlings to think taller is better. Taller is not better when it comes to seedlings at all. And in fact, shorter and stouter and greener is the more, just a strong, you can just imagine this being a stronger thing. And the thing you want to imagine is this plant being out there in the elements, right? In our upstate New York, our summer rains where the rain is pounding and the wind comes through, we want something that is stout and able to be really resilient in the face of climatic excitement. And so when you go to the nursery, if you're picking things out or you're growing things at home, you really want to encourage short and stout. And so that bottom picture you see there where you have something that's leaning or it's leggy, that means it needs more light. Any plant that's pale, that means it needs more light and possibly even more nutrients such as nitrogen. Okay, so let's talk about common mistakes. And Mila and I love to say this, and we're glad that our folks at Fruition agree with us, that egg cartons are best for holding eggs, or maybe your bead collection or something like that. But really, they just don't hold enough soil to help your plants grow beyond germination. They can dry out super easily. And then because an egg carton curves at the bottom, the part of the plant that, the part of the roots that is the widest is at the bottom. And so as the egg carton gets narrower, your plant wants to get bigger. And so those bottom roots, the lead roots that are growing, those tips really get damaged and it gets really fragile. So they might feel like your seeds will germinate really easily, but pretty much as soon as they germinate, they would need to be transplanted out of the egg carton. So we really discourage that. If you want to use something that is, recycled from home, I think a lot of us have a lot of toilet paper tubes right now. And so maybe you don't, but if you do, toilet paper tubes are a much better choice. You can cut the bottoms. Yep, Mila showing you can just cut the bottom to fold it in, and it makes a great seed starting thing. Also, there are little ways you can make them out of newspaper, almost these little origami seed starting things if you want to be reusing things from home. So no egg cartons. Okay, so another thing to know, another way to really be successful is to sow 2 to 3 seeds in each of the cells that you're going to sow in. One thing this does is it helps you optimize the time and the space. So for a lot of us, when we're starting seeds, maybe we only have a little tiny windowsill to start on or one little light to grow under. If that's the case, you want every little pot that you put out there to yield a plant for your garden. So if you just put 1 seed per pot, and then that seed doesn't germinate, now you've had this little space underneath your light or on your windowsill, and you got no plant out of it. So the good news is that seeds are pretty cheap. Like Mila was saying, my packet of kale seeds has 100 seeds in here. I do not need 100 kale plants, do I? So I'm going to put 2 or 3 kale seeds in each of my little cells to make sure that I end up with a kale plant in each of those. The only time I wouldn't do that is if I only had a couple of seeds of something, then I might hedge my bets and put them all separately. Now, what we are going to do is, and I'll demonstrate this for you later, once they've all germinated, I'm going to go ahead, just like they do in the picture, and I'm going to cut out all but the largest seedlings. So even though I'm planting 3 seeds in the same cell, in the end, I'm only going to end up with 1 plant. And you'll see that she's got a picture of scissors there. And one of the reasons she has a picture of scissors there is because that's how we're going to get rid of the other plant, is we're going to go through and we're actually going to clip it off. It's very tempting if you're anything like me, I can't stand to kill plants. I mean, I do it all the time, but I can't stand to do it. It's very tempting to want to try and pull those 2 seedlings apart and get 2 seedlings out of it. I'm not saying that won't work if you try and do it, but you might kill both of them in the process. So it's much better to just cut off the top, and depending on what you've got there, if it's an edible thing like broccoli or kale, go ahead and pop it in your mouth and eat it. Don't do that with tomatoes and peppers. Those aren't edible. But if you have something that's edible, the leaves are edible, you can just eat those like little sprouts on your salad. It's really
it might also be tempting to pinch those off, pull them out. I'm going to say in this case, go ahead and do the persnickety thing of grabbing those scissors and clipping those off, because when you go to pinch or when you go to pull out the additional seedling, there's a good chance that you either bruise or hurt the roots or disturb the roots of the one that you're trying to leave behind.
Yep, it's classic. We've all done it before. You'll probably ignore us and do it at one point and then say, I should have listened to Mila and Jennie. It's okay if you have to learn that way. That's how I have to learn things too. So it's pretty common. Okay, so another thing we're going to be thinking about is how we water our seedlings. And we'll be talking about this again later. Bottom watering is your best friend. So I mentioned earlier the disease complex called damping off. So damping off basically happens when we have way too much moisture, especially around the leaves and what we call the collar. So the collar is where the stem turns into roots. And this is where damping off occurs. And what happens if there's too much moisture accumulating in that area, these little fungal critters set in, and usually around day, I would say 2, 3, 4, all of a sudden your seedlings that look fantastic all flop over and die. It happens to the best of us, but we really want to discourage that. And so one of the ways you can discourage that is with bottom watering. Now, one thing you want to make sure is if you are bottom watering, that you don't have water just sitting in the tray. So let's say you're using a tray that doesn't have holes in it to do a little bottom watering. You want to make sure that all that water is taken up by the plants. And if it's not, you want to remove that excess water so you don't have things just sitting there. That can attract some insect pests like flea beetles. which are another one of our sort of seedling killers or predators. And so the other thing is when you're top watering, especially if you don't have very good, if your watering can has big holes, you can see how the soil is being pushed away from the seedlings in the bottom of that picture. And so that can happen also, is that the soil gets pushed away from the roots gets exposed to air, they dry out, and then your seedlings die. So you can still do top watering, but you want to be able to do it with something that's a little bit finer mister if you're going to do that. Okay. Number 4. So this is a really helpful thing to do.
Jenny,
yeah.
Since we were just talking about watering, can you talk about misting?
Yeah, so I can go back and talk about misting. So, let's go back. So I use for my watering, I like to use, what I like to do is thanks Mila. I like to do bottom watering, and then I keep around a spray bottle. And so one of the things that can be really helpful is to keep the environment around your leaves really humid. These seedlings, especially some of our seedlings like tomatoes and peppers, these are tropical plants and they are meant to grow in a humid environment. And so Mila's got her spray bottle there. Thanks for bringing that, Mila. And so a lot of times what I'll do is I'll bottom water, but then I'll also squirt all my seedlings as I'm watering, to just try and keep, and especially when the seeds are most tender, they've just germinated, they're really, really, really delicate then. And so that's a really nice way to keep the soil surface nice and moist. I actually use, this is funny enough, but you know those backpack sprayers that are used for spraying pesticides, or there's these little pump sprayers that are used for spraying pesticides. Of course, I don't use pesticides, it's not part of my deal, but I use that for watering. So I have one of those and I have a little pump sprayer and I spray water with those on my seedlings. So there's a lot of choices. A lot of those things you can get really cheap or find them at a yard sale. Of course, you just want to make sure if you do find one at a yard sale that someone didn't use pesticides in it and now you're going to try and use it on your seedlings. Okay, so another thing you're going to need to do after you've grown your seedlings is acclimate your seedlings. So sometimes I think of these little babies as like these baby seedlings, and when we send them out into the garden, we plant them out in the garden, it's like sending your children off to college. And if you don't teach your kids a few simple things before you send them off to college, they may have a hard time there. For example, if your kids don't know how to cook for themselves or go grocery shopping or, you know, use a credit card. So there's all these little things that we're going to do to make our transition from from a really, really comforting and caring environment, which is wherever we're growing our seedlings, out into the big old wild world that is our garden and nature. So what you need to do is transition your seedlings to that kind of life. It takes usually about 5 to 7 days. And what you're going to do is slowly increase their exposure to direct sunlight. So if they've been sitting in your house, it's just like us going out to, you know, the first few days when everyone gets a sunburn, the first day it's like 75 degrees out and sunny. The same thing can happen to your plants. So the first day that I put my seedlings outside, I put them in a place that has not full sun, but partial sun. And I probably only leave them out there for an hour or two. And I've definitely made the mistake before of leaving them out for more than that and burning them all. The other thing we're going to slowly do is reduce the amount of water we give them. So once their root volume has increased, they'll be able to store water a little bit better. And so we want them to be ready for dealing with the fluctuation in the soil water once they go out. The other thing it's going to help with is, of course, the temperature in our house is probably pretty consistent. Maybe it gets a little cooler at night, but your house probably at the most fluctuates, 10 to 15 degrees over the course of the day, maybe 20 for those of you who use a wood stove and let it get cold at night. But outside, they're going to be in temperatures that maybe are down into the 40s and all the way up into the 90s, and we need to get them ready for that. When you're doing this, you want to make sure that you're slowly increasing the amount of time till eventually you're leaving your seedlings outside all night long and before we plant them. So for a day or two. The one thing you want to make sure is for some of your seedlings that really can't handle frost, like tomatoes and peppers and eggplants, you want to really pay attention to that and bring them back inside if it's going to freeze. And then for things in the Solanaceae, which is the tomato and the pepper and the eggplant family, those guys are real wimps. They're completely subtropical plants, and they don't even like it when nights are under 50 degrees. So you're going to bring them back inside really all the way up until we're legitimately into summer. Okay, this is the other thing that is so important to know, that you will make mistakes doing this. You're going to kill plants, and that's part of learning. It's part of experimenting. And, you know, sometimes I hear people say to me, like, I'm not a gardener. I kill plants all the time. I'm like, I kill plants all the time. That's part of gardening. And it's really something to know as you're learning to start seeds. You will sometimes get damping off. You will sometimes get flea beetles. You will sometimes have nothing germinate, or you'll go clip the seeds and you'll pull them out. And don't get frustrated with yourself. It really is part of the learning experience and part of gardening. And still after 25 years, I will always have some moment like that where I made a mistake, and it's just always an opportunity to learn more. Last year I got to deal with rats. Remember that, Mila? I got to learn how to garden with rats. We had a rat problem and they ate all my seedlings. Okay, so let's have another pause for questions before we go into our next section.
So Darlene has her hand up.
Okay, Darlene. Can you help her unmute, Mila?
Yep, I'll do that. Okay, Darlene, you are unmuted. Hold on. Why is she not? Okay, there you go, Darlene.
Okay, I guess I wanted to know if you start the seeds too soon and they're really tall, is there any part that you can reuse to start them again?
Okay, well, that's a great question. And I will tell you, there's only one species that will tolerate that, and it's a tomato. So if you end up with a tomato that's way too tall, you can actually replant that tomato. Yeah, Mila's demonstrating with her pencil. I don't know if you can see Mila.
So if my pencil was my tall, leggy tomato, before planting out, what I would do when I go to plant it, I would have planted about that far down and put soil all the way up the length of the tomato up until like the first really like thick leaves up towards the top. And what will happen is there's a hormonal process in the tomatoes where they put out what they call adventitious roots. So wherever a root is touching plant is touching soil, it will send out a new root. So if you plant this tomato that's just mostly a stem and then some leaves up here, all the way down to those leaves, you will get new root growth along that whole stem.
Yep, but just with tomatoes. And so everybody else, once it gets tall and leggy, there's really kind of no turning back and nothing you can do about it. And I really discourage you from being like, oh, I'm just going to plant them anyway because I grew them and I want to plant them. I've been there and I've done that. And I can tell you it doesn't work out well. Usually what ends up happening is one of two things. Either it takes up a bunch of space, but it never produces what you wanted it to produce. Or the worst case scenario is not only does it do that, but because it's so weak and poor performing, it attracts pests into your garden that then affect all your healthy plants as well. And so it's just like, a weak animal being, part of a group draws in predators. And so we really want to have only strong plants out there. If you're anything like me, I've definitely got such a tender heart, and I never like to exclude anything or get rid of anything. But the truth is that a weak seedling becomes a weak plant, and it's not going to give you what you were hoping to harvest. So I really discourage you from planting those. And also, it's very tempting if you go to the nursery to buy plants, you go over to the sale rack and you see these ailing plants, and it's like going and adopting a cute little kitty that's only got 3 legs. It's like, it's not like that. Those plants are not going to do well in your garden, and they're really not worth the pennies you're going to pay for them. Okay, do we have any more questions?
I have a nice collection of questions here for you.
Let's go.
So these are all about the care of seedlings. Okay. So we did have a question about somebody who has, well water or mineral heavy water.
Yeah.
Should they be treating their seedlings any differently if they have heavy water?
That's a great question. I think there are probably some species that will be more sensitive. And one thing I will do, actually, I do this for watering my house plants as well, is I actually keep a bucket out to collect rainwater. Rainwater is generally neutral-ish, not quite neutral, maybe pH 6, and definitely has some minerals, but not as many minerals. So if your groundwater is like, it's really hard, that can be really hard on your seedlings. And I encourage you to, you don't have to have a fancy rainwater collection system. You can just keep a 5-gallon bucket outside. And then I use that for watering. That can be really nice. So I would avoid if you have super, super heavy water, or you can filter it just the same way you might for your drinking water. Also, same for really heavy chlorine water. If your water is so chlorinated that it smells like a swimming pool, you might want to filter that. Your plants might be affected a little bit like that.
Yeah, my water is pretty chlorinated, so I just keep an old milk gallon container, and I'll fill it. I'll make sure my plants are watered. Once I finish watering, I'll fill that container right away and just let it sit.
Yes.
And the next time I have to go to water, a lot of that's evaporated.
Yep. Good call.
Other questions that we have about containers. So we talked about how egg cartons may look really cute on Pinterest with all those little seedlings in them, but they're actually terrible for your plants. What are some other containers that people can use? We talked about these toilet paper tubes that you can fold the bottom of and make a nice kind of like 3-inch tall tube. That's actually great for encouraging seeds to put down long and deep roots. What about things like paper or plastic cups, Jenny? We had a question about that.
Okay, well, we're gonna go all over containers when we get to the hands-on part, but I'll just tell you right now. So yeah, yogurt containers, if you poke holes in the bottom, those can be fantastic. Mila will show you later some of her seedlings, those salad tubs that you get for like spinach or salad mix, at the grocery store. Those are awesome containers also for starting seeds. I'm just trying to think of other things we sometimes reuse.
Oh, the peat pellets.
Okay, well, yeah, people like the peat pellets. I'm not crazy about the peat pellets. I find that they dry out really, really easily. Is that your experience, Mila? If you like the peat pellets and they work for you, it's a fun experiment, but my experience is that they dry out too easily for my taste. So I prefer not to use those. They also are pots you can buy called cow pots that are actually made out of manure, and there are peat pots instead of peat pellets. Those I think work just fine, but the pellets I've never had success with those, and I've tried, to be honest. And yeah, so those are sort of some of my favorites, and I'll show you. I have an array of other containers I brought with me here. Cottage cheese containers are kind of a nice height. Any of those sort of little things that you might have around can work great. The thing to think about too is the amount of space that you have to put your things in. If you have something like a cottage cheese container, you can put your seeds far enough apart that you might be able to grow more than one seedling in the same pot. We call those community pots. It's very Ithaca, community pot. And so you can have more than one seedling if you have a bigger pot. Also, a lot of times people like to take milk jugs and just cut the top off, or like an old soda container. Look, Mila's got that one there for you. An old soda container, and cut the top off of that. That can work great too. So there's definitely no reason that you need to go out and buy pots. Pots can always be scavenged. They can always be created out of things you have around your house. Usually you have a neighbor that has pots in their garage that they want to get rid of. And then also in here, this is not going to be relevant probably this year, but every year in September, we have a big swap here at CCE Tompkins that is a pot swap where people bring their old pots they're not using, and then you can come and get some of those. And so it's a great way to, you never need to spend money on pots.
So the one common denominator about what you might use for growing your seeds is you want to make sure that it has good drainage. So go ahead and poke drainage holes in the bottom of those things that didn't already have holes in them. And you want to make sure that whatever that material is around the outside, whether it's plastic or like a paper tube, it's not something that's going to wick away a lot of moisture from your soil. So one of the things, like with the egg cartons, again, if you use styrofoam isn't going to be an issue, but if you use things like the paper egg cartons, those tend to suck up a lot of water. So you'll end up sucking water away from your soil where your roots are, where the plant needs them.
Yep. Okay, any other burning questions before we move on?
Yeah, so we had a question. This it kind of goes with watering, but it has to do with feeding your seeds.
Okay, yes, we will get there, but let me just say initially, so when you first plant your seedlings, I'm glad you brought that up because I actually don't think I have a very good slide about that in the slideshow. When you first plant your seedlings, one thing to remember is what a seed is a seed is a little packet of DNA, and then in there with the packet of DNA is all the nutrition that is required for that seed to germinate. So you don't need to add more nutrients to your soil when you're first germinating your seeds. However, as soon as that seed has put on its first set of true leaves. So when a seedling first germinates, those first little seed leaves you see are called cotyledons. And those are not really, they photosynthesize a little bit, but not a ton. But then you'd see the next set of true leaves that really looks like the leaves of that plant. And once those leaves come out, that plant is going to start actively photosynthesizing and actively taking up nutrients from the soil. And so at that point, it is helpful for you to start fertilizing your seedlings in some way. Now, depending on the potting mix that you've purchased, some of them already have a little fertilizer in them. Generally, a seed starting mix doesn't have any fertilizer in it. Now, the danger with having fertilizer too early gets back to that problem of damping off. Basically, well, two things. It's not just a problem of damping off, actually. Two things happen. You can have the challenge of damping off is those nutrients also encourage fungal growth and other things. But then the other thing that can happen is your plant can grow too fast. So this is just like putting a platter of, Snickers bars out for your little kiddo. They're just going to eat them all because they're so delicious. And then your kiddo might grow too fast, if you know what I mean, right? And so we don't want our seedlings growing faster than they're actually adapted to do. So we want to keep them initially in a fairly low nutrient environment. After that, you can use either a slow release organic fertilizer, or I like to use what's called a fish kelp emulsion. If you have cats, you might not want to use fish kelp emulsion because it smells a little bit like fish and your cats might get really interested in your seedlings. But a fish kelp emulsion that I spray maybe once a week onto my plants. So that's another option for folks. I don't know if that answers that question. Do you have a technique you like to use, Mila?
It has to do with what I'm using to grow my seeds. So I always spend the money and buy a seed starting mix as opposed to buying something else, because what I know is that is a low nutrient mix.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure that when I'm first planting my seeds, they're in basically as neutral a medium as possible. And then I'll begin to add more things to it. So for instance, I also have, I think it's like a Neptune's Harvest seaweed fertilizer that I use. That and there's instructions on the back of the bottles. Always read the instructions of any of the fertilizers you're going to be using, and it'll tell you exactly how to use it. Some might say add it to your water, and when you're bottom watering, go ahead and add it that way. Some may say that you want to put it in your spray bottle and have it be a foliar a spray. So just follow the instructions on whatever bottle that you have, and make sure that, because they've optimized that for use in that way. And it'll also tell you what the timing is. It might say once a week or once every 3 days or whatever. So it just follows the instructions. The other thing too, let's see, when I go to transplant my seedlings, so I'll often start them, pretty small. So before they have a chance to get outdoors, I might have to pop them up into a slightly larger pot. And when I do that, I'll make sure to pop them up into a pot with not just seed starting mix, but potting mix that has compost in it.
Yep.
And about 20% compost to 80% of your seeds, of your other mix, is just about the right amount of nutrients for these plants.
Yep, that's great advice.
And then one last question about caring for these tiny little seedlings has to do with a grow light. So say you decided that the window is not enough and you need to have a grow light. How many hours of artificial light do these plants want?
Oh, that is such a great question. And I'll tell you that people are not in agreement about the answer. So I just noticed, for example, that my neighbors are keeping their grow lights on 24 hours a day. People do that. And in fact, in nurseries, people will do that. I don't do that. What we're trying to mimic is the growing conditions that the plants would be in when they're actually really would be doing that in nature. So for me, I generally leave my grow lights on either 14 or 16 hours a day, sort of mimicking, late spring, early summer, essentially. Everybody has difference of opinion. I would at least go 12 hours of light on your lights, but I really like to go a little bit farther with that. If you are leaving them on 24 hours a day, you need to be prepared to also keep up with them nutritionally. And I think that's confusing for the plants when then they go outside and the day length gets shorter. So I really like to keep the day length that I'm creating for them inside is going to be matching the day length that when I will plant them outside. So for example, for the tomatoes, we're probably putting those in the ground around May 15th, or maybe even a little bit later than that to be on the safe side. So by then we're getting pretty close to the solstice. The sun is up for, you know, probably 14 to 15 hours a day-ish, yeah, something like that. So that's about where I have my grow lights at. I usually do about 14. What about you, Mila?
What I usually do is I'll go to see how long my day is when I'm putting it out. So same kind of thing. Around May 15th, I'm looking at like a 13-hour day.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
I'm basically, what I'm trying to do is I'm going to say, I want my plants to believe that they're living in a perpetual May 15th.
There you go.
Inside my house until it's actually May 15th.
I love that we agree on that. We've never talked about that before, and I thought I made that up, but clearly it was.
No, I do the same thing.
I love it.
It's like Groundhog Day, the movie, but for the plants.
Yep.
And then the other thing too about using artificial light for your plants, keep it really close to the leaves, like really close, like within a few inches. So I keep a set of fluorescent grow lights suspended over my plants, and it might just be maybe like 2 inches above the tallest of the leaves. They really want the intensity of that light. And believe it or not, even though that might seem like it's a lot of light to have really close to your plants, our sun is way stronger than that. So when our plants go from being in this place where the fluorescent lights or the LED lights are shining on them from a few inches away, the actual light that our actual sun, that star out there, gives to us is way more intense.
Yep.
And I think that's it for right now for this section.
Okay, great. So I want you to remember all that. Actually, you know what, let's do I'm going to go through the whole slideshow. So we're going to actually change subjects for a little while and then come back to the subject that we have just been talking about. And we're going to talk about which seeds go where. So let's talk about, remember there were those 5 categories that I mentioned in the beginning. We're talking about cool crops and warm crops, or you can think of them as spring and fall crops and summer crops. And we're going to talk about things that are direct seeded and things that are transplanted. So we're now going to go through those one by one and talk about what they are. Remember, I will be sending you this PDF eventually. So, I encourage you to write this down, but also you will be getting this from us. So direct seeds. So these are crops to sow in the cool, and they also like to grow in the cool. So they like to germinate when it's cold, and they like to grow when it's cold. When I say cold, I mean probably over, I'm going to say like with these ones specifically, they'd like the soil temperature to be somewhere up nearing 50 degrees, but it doesn't quite need to be all the way there necessarily. And they love the air temperature.
That will be in just like another week or 2 here.
Yep.
Significant.
And depending on where you are, your soil, if you have a warm spot, your soil might already be that warm. We have not had, I should knock on wood as I'm saying this, I can't reach any wood. We haven't had that much cold recently and snow, and so the soil has had a lot of time to warm up. So these are the ones that I like to grow in the direct seeding. So I'm putting the seeds right into the ground. So spinach is a great one. For those of you who are familiar, tatsoi is an Asian spinach. It's related to broccoli, and it's got these really beautiful green leaves. One of the things I love about tatsoi as opposed to spinach is tatsoi tends not to bolt or go to flower as quickly as spinach. So it's a nice thing to have around for when it starts to warm up a little bit to use as a nice augment to your salad greens. Arugula is another green that germinates really easily. And in fact, I think arugula can germinate all the way down, maybe soil temps almost down into the low 40s. So almost all of us could go out and plant arugula right now, probably. Radishes are another classic, easy, quick germinator. They'll grow and it's really cold. You could probably seed those right now as well. Salad turnips is the picture you see there, those Japanese style turnips. I love those. My kid, who will eat almost no vegetables, will eat a salad turnip. And then everyone's favorite is peas. Now I hear a lot of people saying they're planting their peas now, and I'm not saying you can go and you can plant your peas now, but I will tell you that I have done the experiment when I plant my peas the earliest date humanly possible, and then I plant more 2 weeks later, and then I plant more 2 weeks after that. And what I'll tell you is around June 1st, they're all the exact same heights. And so the thing you have going, the thing that can happen is sometimes when you plant a little too early, that cold soil, the moisture in that cold soil can cause your peas to rot a little bit. If you are going to plant your peas this early, what I encourage you to do is to sprout them inside first. I just like to put my peas in a little jar of water and let them imbibe that water. And then once I start to see that root start to break through the seed coat, then I'll put them out. That'll give them a little bit of a head start so that they're less likely to rot in the cold soil. But I encourage you, if you're chomping in the bit and you've got tons of pea seeds, go ahead and plant your peas. But I usually like to wait an extra 2 weeks to do that.
Yeah, I have a system where I use my old tomato cages, because I'm not going to use them yet, where I'm planting my peas, and I've put them out, and I've planted every other tomato cage, because I can always put another stake in the middle and make it taller later on. I planted every other tomato cage with my peas, with the idea that I'm going to see how it goes if I'm jumping the gun and being a little early, and then I'm going to do it again in 2 more weeks. So we'll have a nice test to see what happens for the ones planted on March 31st versus the ones planted on April 14th.
Yes, be a scientist. Go experiment in your garden. It's the best way to learn. You can take all the classes you want, but everybody's garden will be different. And some of you just might also be charmed in that way. And so go and try things out. Okay, so now we're going to talk about cool germinating crops. So these are crops that like cold germination and they like cold weather, but they're better off being started inside and then transplanted outside as soon as your soil is workable. And so here's your list. Lettuce, specifically looking at warm season lettuce. So cool season lettuces, we could go on and on. We could have a whole class on lettuce. But when you're ordering lettuce seed, what you'll notice is there are some lettuces that are better for cool temperatures and some that are better for warm temperatures. So lettuce is a good one to start inside. Parsley, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, kale. Kale you can start outside or inside, but if you're starting it outside, you want to wait until a little bit later, like maybe you'll start your fall kale directly seeded outside in the middle of summer. Radicchio, endive, and then leeks and onions, you definitely want to be starting inside. And leeks and onions take quite a while to grow from seed, and so those are actually ones that if you haven't started those yet, I wouldn't recommend starting those. Those really need to be started in February, but you can go and you can buy leek starts and onion starts.
Hey, Jenny, I'm going to ask you, because I forgot to ask you the last slide. Go back 1 slide, please.
Okay, let me see if I know how to do that. Yep, I do. Okay.
Can you tell our brand new gardeners, if you are brand new to this and you can only start 1 or 2 things, which of the 2 things here would you say, go ahead and start this for your best chance of success?
Oh, okay. That's a great question. I feel like I'm on a quiz show. I pick radishes and peas. How'd I do?
Excellent, except I don't like radishes.
Okay, well then for you, I pick tatsoi and peas or spinach.
Yes, I love tatsoi.
Okay. I love radishes, and radishes are fun because they come out really quickly. So radishes are only going to be in your garden for 30 days, 35 maybe at the most. And so it's a nice thing. You can plant radishes and then pull them out later. Maybe Mila's going to have to give all her radishes to me though. But yeah, peas, and I would say spinach or tatsoi would be, if you really like arugula, that's also easy as pie. I just know that not everybody likes arugula, myself included. I only mildly like arugula, so I didn't pick arugula. On this list, salad turnips is sort of the most challenging of them all. That's a great question, Mila. Thank you. And so let's do the same on this list. Let's say, which ones are the easiest ones? Broccoli and kale are the easiest ones on this list by far. Next, followed by lettuce. Parsley is also not too tough, but there's a trick with parsley. Parsley takes forever to germinate. You think that 3 weeks easily for parsley to germinate. And I will tell you a little trick is that I learned, I don't even remember where I learned this, is to soak the parsley seed overnight in really warm water, not boiling, but really warm water, and then drain that water and then start your seeds. That can really, really help speed up the parsley germination. It's a really easy plant to grow, but it's also a great one to not start from seed if you're a beginner. But yeah, broccoli and kale are by far the easiest on this list.
Yeah, I grow hundreds of things and I refuse to grow my own parsley anymore. It's just, I have such little room for growing that I've decided I don't want to give 4 weeks to this one set of seeds. I'm just going to go ahead and buy starts.
There you go.
But you know what? If you have room for it and you love it, go ahead and grow more.
Okay, so we've finished our cool crops. So these are things that you're going to be planting anywhere from, I would say, next week all the way until around May 15th, those cool crops that we just passed. The next group is warm germinating crops that you can direct seed outside. So these are crops that need a little bit more warmth, but you're going to never plant them inside, only outside. And the two that fall in that category are beets and carrots. Now, beets and carrots don't need things quite as warm as everything else. And in fact, beets can handle a little bit cooler than carrots can. And so you can start seeding these guys anytime around May. What I've found lately is that things are warming up in our spring enough that the recommendation has always been like late April, early May. I've actually been starting to plant my beets and carrots even earlier than that. And your best bet is to see how warm is your soil. And one thing to remember as you're gardening is the soil temperature and the air temperature are not always directly correlated. We can have really cool air temperatures in late April. This just happens to be a cold day. Those are not going to cool your soil down. Your soil has been storing up heat for quite a while at that point. And so, and vice versa, we can have a balmy, warm day right now and your soil can still be really cold. So don't let the air temperature convince you of the soil temperature. Go stick your finger in the soil and feel if it feels cold to you. Like you stick your finger in and you're like, this is cold, and you want to pull your hands out. It's too cold for you to be putting seeds in there. If you stick your finger in and it's like kind of cool, but you can hang out and work in the soil for a long time and maybe your hands feel a little cool, but they're not getting too cold, then that's when you can start to germinate, work with your cool germinating crops. But you want it to be really comfortable to work with your hands in the soil when you go to plant your beets and carrots. And so for me, that starts to happen around late April. Now, again, I really encourage you to experiment. I happen to have gobs and gobs of beet seeds, and how many beets do you really need, right? So beets is one of those ones. Yeah, Mila's got some beet seeds right there. Beets is one of those ones that I will experiment by pushing the limit and really getting them like a lot earlier than is recommended. One little secret I'll tell you about beets that Mila was just showing you, these beet seeds, actually that the thing that you plant for a beet is actually the beet fruit. So let's see if you guys can see that. I don't know if you can see Mila.
I'll see if I can get my biggest one.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys can see Mila. You may not be on their version of the screen. But inside each of those little fruits is actually 5 seeds. So every time you plant a beet, you might notice that they germinate in these little groups of 5. And that's because there's 5 seeds inside each of those little fruits. So beets are a fun one to experiment with, trying a little early. When you're ordering seeds, if you know you're looking for an early carrot, for example, you really want to make sure when you're choosing your varieties that you're reading about the timing for those varieties. So, for example, I'm not sure how many varieties of carrots there are out there, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's in the 50 to 100 range. And some of those carrots are really great for early germination. Some are really great for warm season. Some are really great for late fall, and some are great for overwintering. You want to make sure that you're planting the right seed for the right variety at the right time. So if you want to get your carrots in as early as possible, choose a variety that says early carrots. And in that seed catalog, they'll probably tell you the actual soil temperature that seed needs to be germinated at. You can go ahead and then find the one that's the coolest if you want to get an early carrot started. So, so you're going to seed these anytime between, I'm going to say late April and early August. I'm going to seed carrots really thickly and then thin them to 1 inch apart. And I'm giving you that advice, but now I'm going to tell you, I actually don't really thin my carrots to 1 inch apart. I keep them much closer. The only reason I'm able to do that is I really have cultivated some pretty incredibly loose soil. And so that works in my soil. If you have really heavy clay soil, it might not work as well for you, and you want to thin them to 1 inch apart. Some people might ask the question, when should I thin my carrots, Jenny? I'm going to assume someone's going to type that into the chat box. You want to wait until the carrots have a couple of sets of leaves. I usually wait till they're about 2 inches tall to thin them. You can do it when they're even younger, but I like to wait until I can really see who is dominating. And then what you want to do is leave the biggest ones and remove the rest. Some people might recommend to thin them earlier. I really like to wait. The other thing about waiting is then you can really tell your carrots from if you have a bunch of weeds mixed in there. So that's also helpful.
So I do have a question that's a really good one to ask right now is for anybody who's really excited to get out into their garden, but they're going to hold off and they're going to wait like 2 more weeks before planting. What's something they can do to their garden right now to make it really hospitable for those seeds in 2 weeks?
Great question. So I'm going to say a couple of things, not looking at everyone's garden at the same time. 2 things that you want to do is, first of all, go out there and clean up any weeds that you have out there right now. Some of our little tiny weeds that are out there, especially what's cardamom called in English, Mila? The little,
I don't know. I only know it in Latin.
Right, I only know it in Latin too. Anyway, there's a little weed that's out there. It's in everybody's garden right now, and of course, I can only remember the Latin name and not the common name right now. But it's those little guys are already almost ready to go to seed. So go out there and weed your garden, weed the area that you're going to plant, and then if you have a digging fork or a broad fork or anything that you can start to loosen your soil up with a little bit, that's going to really help get moisture and air penetrating down in the column. And then I would add a couple to 3 inches of compost. And that would be a great thing to start doing. And then stay vigilant about the weeding. If I weeded my beds and I wasn't going to plant them for 2 weeks, I probably would actually weed them and then I'd cover them with something so more weed seeds weren't germinating in the spot. Or another option, another thing you can do is actually encourage weeds to germinate. Some people like to do this, where you go out, you clean up all the weeds, you loosen things up, you actually even water it, and you encourage all the weed seed that's near the surface to germinate so that you can then come in and kill it before all your seedlings come through. And if I have places where I know that I'm going to be gardening in a few weeks, I will often do that. And then once those weed seeds have germinated, I'll either cover them either with a cloth or a tarp of some kind to sort of smother them and keep the light off of them. So that's what you can be doing right now. I know all of us want to get out there in the garden. Another thing I'll encourage you to do is, some of you may have raised beds where you have wooden sides, and some of you may not. The other thing that's a really nice thing to do right now is to go out and to actually edge your beds, where you make a nice straight line and you clean up the weeds that are trying to creep into the edge of the bed. That's one of those things that once spring really starts going, you don't really have time to do, but it really can make a difference on how much the quackgrass and the runner grasses run into your beds. And it also adds a really nice beautification element to it. So that's what I would do. Back to the beets and carrots. One of the things with beets, and especially with carrots, is carrots have no patience for drying out. You can have your carrot seeds start germinating, and if it loses moisture, it will just dry out and stop germinating. So carrots are kind of notoriously one of the hardest crops to get germinating. So one of the things you want to do is be really vigilant about keeping those seedlings moist. There are a couple of tricks you can do to do that, but especially sometimes people like to actually put a sheet of plastic over their carrots. You got to be careful about not rotting your seedlings or cooking your seedlings if you do that. I've even heard of people putting a pane of glass over their carrots. I just am really vigilant about watering. Another little trick I'll do when I'm planting carrots sometimes is I'll actually, as I create the furrow in my bed, the little row to plant carrots, I actually will fill that with potting soil, and then I'll plant the carrots into the potting soil in the row. So it's almost like giving them a little bit extra loose soil to germinate in that holds water really well, without starting them inside and having to transplant them. Okay, so let's keep going through our warm germinating crops.
Wait, hold on. Before that, we had a question about what happens if it's still getting cold at night.
Oh, okay.
And are germinated.
Yeah. So for these cool germinating crops, the great news is that they're hardy and they're tough. So they can handle, they can actually really handle temperatures even into the upper level of freezing temperatures. So they're hardy to, I'm not sure what temperature I would start to panic about my carrots, but I think they're even fine into the upper 20s. You really don't need to worry. Do you have a thought on that, Mila?
Well, what I'd say is, if you're going to walk out and you're going to see that the morning dew isn't dew, it's actually little frost crystals, that's when I worry.
That's when you worry.
Well, I worry about my leafy things. The carrots aren't so bad because, you know, the thing that you want to eat is underground. And they're really pretty cold hardy anyway. So
Yeah.
you're not going to be damaging your leaves with, you might damage your leaves a little bit with those frost crystals, but not very much. But generally, if it's going to be below freezing and I'm worried about these little plants I've got out there, I'll go over and just cover them over overnight. And the reason for that is that, you know, as the humidity in the air kind of falls to the ground and condenses, it actually will drop onto your leaf. And then if, and that's what when you go out and you see the morning dew on your leaves. And if it's, you know, below freezing, when that happens, those droplets on your leaves will crystallize. And it's in that crystallization that you'll damage those leaves. So if you just keep something from keeping that dew falling on your leaves overnight, you're going to be safe. So throw an old bed sheet over them. You'll be fine.
Old bed sheets are great for that. Okay, so let's go to our next group of warm germinating crops that you're going to directly seed into your soil. So these are things you don't need to grow from transplant. In fact, you probably shouldn't. And they're going to grow great right by putting them right into the soil. And this is corn and beans. So any fresh eating beans like bush beans or pole beans, you're going to sow them in rows. I like to put a seed about every 3 to 4 inches. And then I sometimes will thin to every 6 inches, depending on how big those plants are going to get. Beans, you can add inoculants. So there's all the leguminous crops, the bean family crops, they all have these bacteria that are associated with their roots, and those root nodules help them fix nitrogen. You can increase your germination and your yield by adding this inoculant that you can buy at the store for bees and for peas. You don't have to do it, but sometimes it can help things out a little bit. And then with corn, let's see, the thing you want to do is be keeping all these moist to wait for germination. Corn, what really likes it warm to germinate. And so you want the soil, I tell this every time I teach a class, but I heard a farmer say once, this corn farmer said to me, I asked him, how do you know when you plant your corn? And he said, well, when it's warm enough for me to sit on the soil with my bare bottom, that's when it's time to plant the corn. I didn't ask him why he was sitting on the soil with his bare bottom. A lot of people also will say when the lilacs are blooming, that's a good time to plant your corn. So you really want to wait until it's pretty warm out. 70-degree soil is really nice for planting corn. So we're talking about late May, early June, late July. Again, with the corn and all these things, it's better to wait till it's definitely warm enough. There's not a major advantage to getting started too early. So usually with my beans, I don't usually put them in the ground until at least June.
And how do you add the inoculant?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So for the inoculant, what I'll usually do is I'll put my beans in a little jar, and then I'll just maybe just even use my squirt bottle, my spray bottle, or just run them under water so that they're just wet, not soaking wet, but wet. And then I just pour the inoculant in the jar with them and mix it all up so it's all coated over. Depending on where you get your seeds, sometimes they actually come with inoculant on them already. And you'll know if they do that, they'll be a funny color. Okay, so other warm germinating crops are some of the herbs that we all love to eat. Dill, basil, cilantro. Some people like to grow their dill and their basil inside, especially basil, because it can, it's not very patient with those cool temperatures, so you like to get a head start. Cilantro starts really well direct seeding, and you'll see that if you grow cilantro in your garden and you let it go to seed, you'll never have to plant cilantro again. It will plant itself for you. So those are another good quick ones. Again, be vigilant about keeping these moist while you're waiting to germinate. Okay, so another group of warm germinating crops are things in the squash family. So that we call that the Cucurbitaceae. And so that includes cucumbers and zucchini, winter squash, pumpkins, and melons. Oh, let's go back. Actually, I didn't mean to do that. So I don't know why it doesn't say melons here. Oh, I do know why it says doesn't say melons in here. These are the things that will direct seed really well outside. So cucumbers, zucchini, winter squash, and pumpkins, you can just go out there, and if you wait till it's warm enough, you can stick that seed right in the ground, and you don't have to start it inside. And the reason melon is not on this list is that's just not going to work for melon in our climate. It's just not warm enough here. We really need to get a head start with melons, and so we're going to start those inside. So these are warm germinating crops that you can start outside. Now, with each of these crops that I've listed here, these are ones where you can actually start them inside or outside. In general, they're more resilient if you direct seed them and start them outside. However, let's say you have a cold spot, or in my case last year, I had a skunk that kept digging up my squash, little rude skunk, and so I kept starting my seeds, and the skunk would come over and it would dig up the pile, and I'd go back and there'd be no seeds there. So I ended up restarting all my winter squash inside because the skunk really wasn't interested in the plants. It was really just interested in the mounds. And so then once I got my plants big enough, I put them out and the skunk left them alone. So those are the worm germinating crops we're going to start outside, but we also have worm germinating crops that we are going to have to start inside. And so the three biggest ones that you just under no circumstances can you start them outside are tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants. These are the three tropical, they're subtropical plants. They really want it to be warm out. Now, some of you may have noticed sometimes you will get volunteer tomatoes in your garden. Every once in a while, a cherry tomato or even another tomato. So in theory, they actually can germinate when it gets warm enough out in our garden. The problem is that we just don't have a long enough season that we can guarantee we're going to get fruit off of those. A lot of times when you have cherry tomatoes, you'll get a fruit off of those, or maybe you'll get you know, a couple of slicer tomatoes, but if you really want a reliable harvest, you need to get a head start inside. And the good news is it's probably just about time right now to be starting those inside. So for those of you that are excited to get something started, right now we're 6 weeks to the last frost. So our last frost here is generally May 14th. Obviously that's an average date. So some years we don't have a frost after April 30th. Some years it'll snow on May 20th. And so you really have to pay attention to what the weather predictions are. So about 6 weeks is a good amount of time to grow a tomato start before you put it in the ground. So it's the perfect time to start these right now. If you haven't started some of these things yet, also don't forget, it's not a big deal if you're putting them out in early June. So don't feel rushed. The eggplants are the ones in this group that will take the longest. You definitely, if you're going to be growing some eggplants and peppers, you might want to get those started now. And then basil was one we mentioned is a really good one to start inside. It can be direct seeded and started outside. But again, with our sort of erratic cold evenings that we have in late spring, I like to start it inside. Cucumbers, summer squash, winter squash that we mentioned before, those are all ones that you can start inside. They like a little warmth. But I prefer to start them outside. Mila likes to start, where you were saying earlier, Mila, you like to start yours inside. Oh, you're still muted.
Here we go. Especially with things like my summer squash, just because I really love yellow squash. I will start some, probably about 2 weeks or so before it's time to put them outside. And then, you know, I'll do some direct seeding later on. So it's part of my succession planting because I want to be able to harvest some and then a few weeks later harvest some more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's lots of different ways to do it. If you want to hedge your bets, do a little bit of each. Start some inside, plant some outside, and again, do the experiment and see what works well in your garden. Okay, so also when we're direct seeding things outside, there are some flowers that really do well to direct seed right outside. You don't have to start them inside at all. So those are listed here. Calendula is just beautiful, that flower you see there, medicinal herb and just all around wonderful pollinator plant, attracts beneficial insects. Poppies are really great. Those you want to be doing ASAP or even I've already done those. Cosmos, zinnias, and sunflowers. And some people like to grow sunflowers inside, but Mila was telling me earlier that they really don't like to be transplanted very well. So I know a lot of like kid experiments, they always are growing sunflowers, and you can do that, but they definitely do better when they're direct seeded. Okay, so now we're going to bring up these crops I mentioned before. These are succession crops. So succession crops just means any crop where you want to plant it on a staggered timing so that you can get a more consistent harvest. So if anybody's ever planted string beans and you planted all your string bean seed at once, you'll know that what happened as a result of that was you had to have string beans for dinner every night for 2 weeks straight, yeah? And by the end, you never wanted to see another string bean again. And so this can be really great for if you're canning or you're doing something like that. But if you'd like to really do is have string beans every few nights for, you know, the whole summer, then what you want to do is called succession planting. So what I've listed here, everyone has different recommendations on how they like to do their succession planting. I've specifically listed here how I do it, and other people might do a closer succession than this. So basically every 3 to 4 weeks, I will start from seed a new set of string beans, zucchini, cucumbers, basil, carrots, and beets. And this keeps me on having a consistent harvest of those throughout the summer. With some of them, I tend to go early, like toward the 3-week side. So the string beans is something I do toward the 3-week side. This is specifically bush beans, actually, that I'm talking about here. Pole beans would take a little bit longer. Cucumbers, I like to go every 3 to 4 weeks, so I can constantly be having a nice harvest, especially pickling cucumbers, where you like to have them nice and small. Same with basil and then carrots and beets. Other things that I like to do on a tighter rotation, a tighter succession, is every 2 to 3 weeks, I like to plant cilantro, dill, salad mix, and lettuce. And some people like to even do those once a week. Yeah, and I find that that's just too much work for me, but every 2 to 3 weeks works great for those. And so a lot of people will ask the question, am I planting these in the same place time after time, or am I planting them in new places? So I plant them in new places. So maybe if I had string beans in one row, then I would get my next succession. I might plant it right next to that row, or I might put it in another location, depending on what I've just pulled out of my garden and what's going on in the garden. And so they don't need to be in the same spot. In fact, in some ways, it's better if they're not in the same spot, but you've actually chosen a new location. Thanks, Mila's telling me it's 7:45. Good timing. Thanks for saying that. And so actually, since it's 7:45, what I would love to do is hold this pause for questions, because I want to show you how to do all these wonderful things we've been describing. So let's get up. I'm gonna actually, you're gonna watch me get up and move. I'm gonna move my computer and me. And Mila, you can help me know, because I can't see anything, what you guys can see.
There, a little bit more to the left. Oh, sorry, other side. A little bit more towards the window. There you go.
How's that? Can you
and
see
a little bit down.
Down more?
Yep. That's
Okay.
good.
Yeah, this is our experiment. Thanks for bearing with us.
So, in this case, I'm going to say unshare your screen.
Yep. Let's
and then if everyone can make sure you've chosen speaker view, Jennie's image will become the biggest image on your screen, and the rest of us will be tiny little boxes.
Okay. How's that? Let's see. Dun, dun, dun. There's my hands. You see them?
Perfect.
Working their magic. Okay. Thanks for bearing with us, everyone. This is our first time attempting to do something hands-on over Zoom. So we're going to figure this out together. So,
okay, and so here's a little Zoom pointer for everybody. If you go to the picture of Jennie, which probably got smaller since I'm the one talking, and you see the little 3 dots, the ellipsis, when you roll your mouse over or your finger over that spot, if you click on that, you'll see an option for pin video. If you hit pin video, it'll make Jennie's image really big, and it'll stay big.
I feel like I'm in I don't know, the Truman Show or something. So, okay, I want to introduce you to a couple of things. First of all, I'm going to show you a couple of different trays you can plant into, and hopefully you can see this pretty well. And what I want to show you is some of my preferences. So these are the kinds of things you might see, a 6-pack or a 4-pack that you might get at the nursery. These are great to reuse. What you'll notice is the ones I'm showing you have really big cells. See how big these are? And I'm going to show you in comparison to this one that has teeny tiny little cells. Can you see that okay, Mila?
Yep, just fine.
So this gets back to what we were talking about before with having enough space for all those roots. What you don't want to have to do is repot things that don't need to be repotted. So if I choose something with a big cell like this, almost all my seedlings, except for maybe tomatoes and peppers and eggplants, will be able to go straight from this size into the ground. Something like a tomato or a pepper and eggplant is going to need to go up to a bigger size, something like this or this. So you can see in sort of comparison to my hand, these are, bigger than my hand. So we call these are a little bit smaller. These are 3-inch pots. Sometimes you'll hear about 4-inch pots. Those are pretty ideal for a tomato once it's been transplanted up. So I really like reusing old 6-packs, but again, I look for ones that have a bigger volume. If you're stuck with something small like this, you can start your seeds in this. You just need to be ready to transplant them to something bigger like this when you get a chance. Another thing I'll show you, this is for those of you who, I'm actually gonna discourage you from using these. This is called a, can you see that? A channel tray. So I've got long, skinny channels. This is for advanced seed starters. So if you see these and you think, oh, that looks really fun. If you can see this tiny amount of soil volume that fits in each of here, what I love about this is I'm, a total botanical nerd, and I want to grow 1,000 different things. I can't remember how many channels are in here, but about 20. So I can start 20 different species in here. These things are almost impossible to keep watered. They hold so little soil. You can start a ton of seeds in a very small space, but they're just really hard to care for. So unless you're a really advanced seed starter, don't buy channel trays. Another thing you can do is to just have a big old tray, just like this, that you would normally put underneath. You can fill this with soil, create sort of your own channel tray out of this. So a lot of times I'll fill something like this with soil, and when then I'm starting my tomato seedlings, I'll just literally make rows, almost like it's a little garden, and I'll start my seeds in there, just like that. So I do introduce you to one of my favorite tools, and let's see, I'm going to get out the right tray, and that is that soil blocker that I'm so obsessed with. And for some of you, this is not in the cards. This is a little bit of an investment. I think these cost about, I don't know, $20.
A little more.
Or more now. I've had mine for like 25 years or 20 years. So
Inflation.
What's that?
Inflation.
Yeah, inflation, exactly. So before we get going with that, what I want to show you, my soil is already pretty moist, but what I want to show you is how moist you want your soil to be. So here's our water that's been sitting out. Just like Mila mentioned before, we have chlorinated water here at CCE Tompkins. So I'm going to pour water into my soil and I'm mixing it around. And what I'm going for, I'm actually not going to mix it all the way so I can show you what you don't want. So if you look here, if I squeeze this, you can see there's water coming out, yeah? So that's too wet, right? So we want it, but if I go down to the bottom and I squeeze, I've got a little bit more, see even here I've actually got water coming out. So I'm going to keep mixing until I have it mixed in a way that when I squeeze it, it all feels wet, but there's no water coming out. So right here is pretty good. I'm squeezing it, there's no water coming out, but it feels nice and moist on my hands. So that's your ideal soil moisture to start with. One mistake I see people making sometimes is they'll fill their pots with soil that's dry, put their seeds in, and then try and water it. One of the things that's tricky about soil is actually the things that they put in potting soil to make it store water. Those things actually are what is called hydrophobic, so they actually repel water. So one thing you probably noticed if you've gone to water your houseplants when you let them get way too dry is sometimes the water just all runs right off. And that has to do with the hydrophobic nature of some of the particles that are in potting soil. So you really want your soil contained in a vessel like this when you are getting it wet. So this is just a little recycle bin. Those are actually great for getting your soil wet, or you can use a Rubbermaid tub or just like a little tub. And then in the case, I'm just going to show you in the case of a tray like this, I'm just going to go through and first I'm going to loosely fill it, but then I'm going to kind of press it down because remember we didn't want any air pockets. So I'm not pressing with all my might. I'm just giving it a little press and then sprinkling more on top. And then I'm going to take my seed packet. Where did my seed packet go? My beautiful rainbow lacinato kale from Fruition Seeds. This is one of my favorite varieties. And I'm just going to open up that packet. And then you might get your seeds out with clean hands, but I'm not going to. And then remember, and you can't see this very well, but I'm going 2 to 3 seeds per cell. And these kale seeds are tiny enough that I'm not even poking a little divot in there. If it was a bigger seed, I would poke a little divot with my hands. But for me, I just leave a little bit of head space, and then I'm going to cover that over again with a little bit more soil. In general, as a rule, you want to plant your seeds, whatever the biggest diameter of that seed is, you want to plant it 2 to 3 times that diameter in depth. So if my seed is I mean, obviously there's no seeds that are an inch in diameter, then I would be going 2 to 3 inches deep with that. So in the case of these teeny tiny kale seeds, they really can basically sit on the surface. They just need to get covered with soil. Okay, so then of course I would be labeling this with my lovely labels, and I will encourage you when you make your labels to write the date that you have planted those seeds right on the label. So, so here's an example of a label. I borrowed these from a friend. She did not label, she did not have her dates. She's a farmer, so she's probably keeping really good records. And so on that label, I like to write the item that I have. So she's got cauliflower there. Sometimes I like to specifically write the variety. If I'm growing, for example, I like to grow 3 or 4 varieties of broccoli. I won't just write broccoli, I'll write solstice, or I'll write whatever the name of the broccoli is. And then I write the date that I've started to germinate that right on the broccoli, that right on the tag. One thing you don't want to have to do is go hunting for your garden journal when you're trying to figure out, you're over at your little seed starting setup and you're trying to figure out what's happened. So I like to write the date right on there. But so I do want to introduce you to my little soil blocker now that we've got the soil moisture right. And just because it's a fun tool to look at, if you become a gardener, this is a great thing to put on your birthday list or whatever, if that is in the scope of your family's means. And you certainly, by all means, don't need one of these, but what's cool is you never run out of pots if you have a soil blocker. So you'll watch what I'm doing is I'm taking this soil blocker and I'm filling the bottom with soil. And I'm really pressing it in there because I'm going to get rid of all those air spots. And if I've got the soil moisture just right, I wish you were all here with me in this room, not just because it's lonely in the building, social distancing. I'm the only one allowed in the building, of course, at one time. So I miss you all, but also I want you to be able to see this. So I'm hoping you can see. So I've got this soil blocker. It's filled with soil. I've really packed it in there. Now I'm going to put it down on this tray, and I'm going to press this lever while I'm picking up on these, this bar at the same time, and I'm pressing pretty hard. And then I'm going to let go. And what I want to show you is what I've created. So here we've got these soil blocks, and they're so cool that look what I can do. Just pick this right up. There's my soil block. There's even a little divot right in the top where you put your seed. And then what's cool is as your roots start to grow, right now if I really banged this, it would fall apart. As your roots start to grow, they hold the soil block together, and they'll actually make it so this really will stick together. And then what's so cool is when I go to plant in the ground, boom, I'm just sticking this thing right in the ground, easy peasy lemon squeezy. So you can see why I'm a huge fan. And then I can just keep going down this row. And with my soil blocker, I think as I recall that I can fit 7 rows in here, so I can get 28 starts in that direction, and then 2 more this way. So that's 36 starts in this tray, all looking good with nice little roots. So it is one of those toys that I like to, I don't like to peddle too many garden toys, but that's one of the garden toys I love a lot. Something to aspire to. So once you've started your seeds, then eventually you're gonna get to that point like we were talking earlier. So here is Erica, this is Erica from Shelter Belt Farm. Her starts, for those of you who know Shelter Belt Farm. And Erica's right at the stage right now where she's ready to start thinning her seedlings. And so what you'll notice, for example, is remember we said 2 to 3 per cell. So if you look at this first cell, hopefully you can see here that there's 3 cauliflower starts. And in the end, we're gonna only have 1. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a look and see which of these, remember, I'm not necessarily looking for the one that's tallest. I'm looking for the one that is greenest, that maybe has the thickest stem down here, and I'm going to choose that one. Often, also, you're also looking to see who's sitting in the middle of the cell. It's not ideal if a seedling is huge, but it's out toward the edge of the cell. Its roots are going to run into the sides. So then I'm just going to come in here. I'm going to cut this one out, and then I'm going to get really ginger in here and cut this one out. And now, since these are cauliflower, I can eat it. And I'm going to leave this beautiful one right here in the middle. So in every one of these cases, I would do this. Here's a good example here. Take a look over here. We've got one seedling that is very tall, but it's also leaning over, right? And then we've got this other one that's a little shorter. In this case, it's really tempting to keep the tall one, but we don't want something that's leaning over. We want something that's growing straight up and down. So I'm cutting out the tall one. So that's the thing I would do, and I would go all the way around and I would just thin them down to 1. What you'll notice is right after you thin them, you're going to notice a burst of growth. They're going to really respond to that. So that's one thing we're going to be doing. Let's see, there was another thing I want to say. Another thing when you have your seedlings that you can do is remember these are going to be going out into the elements where it's rough and tumble out there, right? So it's windy, it's rainy, and we want these guys to be really tough. So one thing you can do to help them toughen up their stems is to actually just run your hands back and forth over them. You get to pretend you're the wind, you're like a storm. Some people actually will even keep a light fan pointed at their seedlings to simulate the wind, but I like to come touch my plants. Of course, your hands shouldn't be as dirty as mine are right now. So that's a good thing you can do to help toughen your plants up. Let's see, what else do I want to show you? So while we're here, we asked about seed starting setups. Another thing that, of course, you don't need, but you can get is a heat mat. And it will really improve your germination. So this is an example of a seedling heat mat. I'm going to roll it out. This one's been rolled up for a while, so it's quite tight. So this just fits on your table underneath your flat, and it will raise the temperature of your soil by about 20 degrees. So what I found is if I'm doing germination without a heat mat, my kale takes about 7 or 8 days to germinate. If I have a heat mat, they usually germinate in 2 to 3 days. So things can happen a lot faster. Mila's going to show you in just a minute or two the little workaround she's done for that, and that you can do without a heat mat. Also, I'm just going to grab some lights I've got over here. And actually, one thing we're going to send around to all of you is after this presentation later this week, we'll send you out. So there's a little lighting kit you can buy. It's kind of hard for y'all to see. This just covers over one flat, and it's got some fluorescent lights in there. The cool thing is it's really, really easy to build your own light frame out of either PVC or wood. And we have some plans for how you can do that. We have an actual drawing with the list of materials. So when we send you materials in the next couple days, we'll send out those materials for you. So if you want to build your own tabletop light where you can just, run down to the hardware store and, well, maybe don't run down to the hardware store now. We want you all to stay home. But someday, run down to the hardware store and get one of those old, and you can usually get these at yard sales too, just one of those old fluorescent lights. I can't remember what they're called right now, but you can just use one of those. They're really, really cheap. You can usually get yourself started with lights for even 10 or 20 bucks. So those are another option for you there. Let's see, what else do I need to show you here? I think that's about what I've got for you here. Mila, what do you have over on your end? Oh, did we lose Mila? No, Mila, you're just muted. I'm going to unmute you.
All right, here we are.
Oh, look at Mila.
Go ahead and pin mine so that it'll still show. So this is my sunny window where I have my lettuce started in these salad containers. So this is simply to just have a community pot with salad seedlings. And what I did over here, let me see, I'll put this down so it's nice and stable instead of holding it up. So just to show you what I'm doing here, I've got a whole bunch of lettuce starts that I did in here. And you see how I put down this string across the middle? That's to remind me that I'm going to ultimately be growing only one lettuce plant in each one of these kind of sections. So as they get a little bit bigger, I'm going to go ahead and pinch them off or cut them off, and I'm going to be able to use those as microgreens, and then I'll leave a little bit of room so that the rest of my salad can get nice and big. But that's just one of these salad containers with holes poked in the bottom. And what's really lovely about that is it comes with a lid, which makes a little tray for catching water. But the workaround that Jennie was talking about in terms of not having a heat mat, it's my secret down here. So down below this shelf is where my seed start setup is. So down here is my radiator. And right here is just this wire shelf. The wire shelf allows a lot of that heat from that radiator to radiate up. And I've just put something here to keep it the same level. And I've set my seed starting tray right on that shelf, right by that radiator. So it's going to be a little extra warm down here than it is in the rest of my house. And then I've got my lights set up above here. I'm not even starting my lights yet because I haven't had my seeds germinate yet. They don't need light, they're still underneath the ground.
Awesome. I love it. Super inspiring, Mila. Thanks for sharing us. You look lovely in the setting sun, by the way.
Thank you.
Okay, so it is 8 o'clock. So
I'm running upstairs now. You
I
go
do.
back.
Oh, we've got someone. Let's see. There we go. I'm muted you, Mila. So I'm going to take a couple of questions now from the chat, but I just want to honor that some of you may need to leave right at 8 o'clock. And if you need to go, feel free to head out. We're going to be sending you a link to the recording. We're going to be sending you a link to the PDF. And also, we're going to send you a whole bunch of handouts. We don't like to send them ahead of time because then we feel like you just stare at your handouts instead of looking at our faces. So we'll send you a whole bunch of handouts about seed starting. But we're going to answer some questions about the soil blocker that are coming in. So I'm going up. So let's see. Okay, I see. I see Jean Grace wants to know, how has she lived without a soil blocker? I will tell you, once you have a soil blocker, you never go back. It's just a thing. And somebody was asking about, this is the 2-inch soil blocker. There's also a 1.5 inch. There's also one that these teeny tiny mini soil blocks. I have one, don't get it. I've never used it. I used it one time. It's too tiny. So I would recommend either the 1.5 inch or the 2-inch.
We have a couple of questions about how to water.
Yes.
With this, when you have soil blocks, because I think there's a little concern that the water might erode away or unmake your blocks.
Yeah. So bottom watering definitely works best in a soil block. And if you start with nice moist soil to begin with, then you can just, mist at the top and then do bottom watering at the bottom. So I will usually put them in a tray where I can then put another tray underneath it that will catch water. I'm always on the lookout at yard sales for old baking pans because those can be really nice, the ones with sides for catching water and putting under trays. I will often, if I'm going to do something like that, I'll often put that on for watering, but then I'll take it away after my things have soaked up the water because I want my tray in direct contact with the heat mats. And once the roots have really started to grow in the soil block, you'll be blown away. You could like blast these things with a hose and they'll hold together. It's kind of awesome.
As far as bottom watering for other things, though, we have a couple of questions for that. So keep in mind that every single container you're using, whether it's an old salad container or yogurt cups, you have to make sure that there are holes in the bottom to let the water flow in and out. If you buy those little cell packs, from your farm store, they already have holes in the bottom. So for bottom watering, one of the best ways to do it is to just, like I would take that entire salad tray and I'll just put it in my kitchen sink with a couple of inches of water in the kitchen sink and it'll just pull everything up from the bottom. That's what they mean by bottom watering.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Linda, you're asking about, can you create the soil block, but packing the soil into a reusable container that plants came in? So like, would you, I don't think it will hold together the same. You could try. I'm thinking what she's saying is pack it in an old soil container and then dump it upside down. One thing that's nice about these is that they're square, so they don't get narrower toward the top or the bottom, which is nice. But you can really, really, with this spring-loaded situation here, you can really put a lot of pressure and that packs. So there's a little plate down here that hits this top. So I don't think that the packing that would happen in the reusable thing would have quite the same effect. So if I didn't have access to a soil blocker, I would just use those pots to germinate in right there. Okay, let's see. Does the soil rock? Yep, I'm looking at all these questions.
How about if you're reusing old containers, how do we make sure they're clean, sanitized?
Okay, that's a great question. And I think this is one of the places where Mila and I, don't we have a difference of opinion on this one? I don't remember, which is good.
I think a little bit. I think I might be a little more persnickety about this one than you are.
Yes, exactly. So, I mean, that's the great, every gardening question out there, the answer is it depends. And so, and not all gardeners agree. And Mila and I are both fantastic gardeners and we do different things in this realm. So I'm a big fan of creating tough plants, and I think diversity is the name of the game. So I don't even clean my pots before I use them, if you can believe that. And I have an incredible garden and I don't really kill my seedlings. If it's caked with gunk, I would clean it. I also would clean it if I had plants that had died in it. I would definitely clean it. I probably wouldn't even ever use it on my seedlings. But if I've just had healthy seedlings in there, I actually think there's a lot of beneficial bacteria that are kind of growing in the soil, and I want my plants interacting with those. So I don't I just don't even bother cleaning my pots unless they're just caked with gunk. Whereas Mila, you do like to keep them a little cleaner.
I do, but partly it's because I had a bad year of damping off one year.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I wanted to make sure there wasn't, any fungus spores on anything. But if it's been a good year, like last year, I didn't have any problems with any of my seedlings. And this year I'm like, I'm not going to bother. But one year, if you have an issue, make sure the next year you're using very clean things. So before we get too far, I want to make sure that we're addressing some of the older questions that were held from earlier in the class. Okay. And we had a couple of questions about woodchucks and deer. So we're not really addressing critters too much at all in this class, but we have plenty of resources. So what we'll do is we'll include with the resources that we send you. We have a couple of gardening with deer, gardening with critters resources that we'll send. So you'll have that. Other things, let's see. We had a couple of questions about, instead of putting things into the ground ultimately, we've got a couple people who want to plant into containers. Mm-hmm. So they want to know if there's anything different about what they should be doing about sizing it. Can they just put it into that container that they want it to be in ultimately and grow that indoors and then take it out?
Yeah, okay. And let me show you that. So one thing I'm going to show you, hopefully Erica won't kill me. I'm going to take one of her seedlings out. I'll try and put it back. It's okay. Maybe she was going to sell it to me anyway. So actually, you know what? This is a little tricky because I didn't bring in one tool that I would normally use. So let's say I had a 6-pack like this and I want to put something into the ground. One thing I like to carry with me out into the field is actually just a regular old kitchen knife. Not like a sharp one, not a butter knife, but like a knife you would put next to your plate at dinner, a silverware knife. And because it's great for digging out seedlings. I don't have one. I'm going to use these scissors, but this isn't normally what I would do. So in this case, I'm going to use that to loosen up my seedling and get it out of the pot. If your roots are pretty stout and it feels really tight, I might, before I do that, I give it a little massage. Like if you've milked a cow before, I just give it a little massage and then that'll loosen things up. And then I'm going to pull that seedling out. In this case, there's 3 seedlings in there, so I would have, already pruned this down to 2. I'm going to replant this in here. Erica will never know the difference. So then once I'm doing that, I'm going to take it outside, and I'm really being careful not to disturb the roots too much. If the roots are really packed together, however, I actually am going to on purpose disturb them. And I'm not going to do that here to Erica's beautiful seedlings because it doesn't need to happen. But if this was really packed together roots, I would actually take my fingers and start to break those roots up a little bit. And what happens when you break those roots up a little bit is you actually are stimulating root growth. So these guys are adapted to disturbance in the soil, and a little bit of root growth, a little bit of disturbance to the roots, not a lot, but a little bit will actually stimulate them to grow more. So I'll give the roots a little bit of a massage and then dig a hole and put it in the ground. The key to this is that you are doing this transplanting at just the right time. So we really don't want to wait until our roots are so developed that they're too tight and too root bound. But if you do it too early and there's not enough roots, then it will be sort of damaged as it's going into the ground. And so a good rule is to sort of give it a little squeeze. You want a little resistance in the soil. That's the roots taking up space in the soil, but not a ton of resistance. So that's going to give you a little bit of clue about when you can do it. Did I answer the whole question there, Mila?
I think so. But the one thing that someone had asked about, can they just start the seeds in the containers that they want to start in, but they want them ultimately to live it indoors? And I'd say, yes, if you've got enough room indoors to do that, go ahead. One of the reasons we tend to start with these smaller things is that there's usually not enough room to grow as much as we want to grow. But that's just because, I like to grow a million things. Yeah. We have a couple more questions specifically about growing seeds. So someone had a couple of things about, they had heard that you should keep your seeds once you've planted them in your container in the dark and keep it covered with plastic until germination.
Okay, so that's a great point. So you don't need to do that quite that dramatically, but it is true that most seeds require dark for germination. So this is why we have them covered with soil. And usually just having them covered with soil will be enough darkness to create the darkness that you need. But it is a good point about if you are using germination, if you're using lights, you don't want to turn those lights on until there's something to photosynthesize, right? So if I'm starting seeds, I'll put them on a heat mat, and then I'll have the soil covering, covering the seeds, but I don't turn my lights on until I actually start to see the true leaves starting to grow, something that would actually need light. And you really don't want to turn them on too early because you'll dry out your seedlings from the top and then you'll get no germination. So that's just the soil covering up is enough. You don't really need to do the plastic cover.
Yeah, so the plastic cover, you see the cell trays being sold with the black tray below and then like the clear plastic on top. The only reason for that sometimes is that you're once you've wet your seed and given it warmth, you've triggered it to know that it's time for me to germinate, time for me to grow. And if that seed dries out, you're kind of stopping that process and that seed will die. So keeping that plastic cover on is kind of helpful to keep that initial moisture there. And then once the seed starts growing, you can take that off. But even so, it's not totally necessary as long as you're making sure that your medium stays nice and moist.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and some people really like those plastic domes. They are nice for keeping your plants moist. However, you can encounter a lot more damping off with the plastic domes. So I tend to only use them for things that really like humidity and really need warmth. So I really try and avoid them for the most part.
Right, and maybe, if you live in a place where you heat with wood, your house heated with a wood stove is going to be have lower humidity than say my house with my baseboards. So you might want to keep that lid over there to make sure that your medium stays moist.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. What's some more questions that we have? And
I think we only have one or two last good questions for tonight. I'm going to direct folks that had more specific questions. Go ahead and ask your question that's a little bit more specific to growline1@gmail.com. That's our team of master gardener volunteers who will be able to send you all sorts of specific information. They're great at following up with this kind of stuff. We had a question about how to use compost. I think we have a composting class in the works right now. So we'll get to that, and there'll be plenty of information. In the meantime, you can go to the CCE website at ccetompkins.com and navigate.org, and navigate over to the composting section. There's so much good information there. And then I think the last good question that we had for tonight about seed starting is, what if seeds need stratification?
Oh, that's a great question. And we didn't even go there because this was a 101 class, although I think we maybe mentioned it in the advertisement. So stratification is just a process by which seeds require a period of, usually it's a period of cold before a period of warm. So if you think about native plants, for example, that are seeds that are falling on the ground in the fall, they're going to go through the winter. The clue that they have to germinate is the change in temperature from cold to warm. So sometimes we have to mimic that. So every once in a while, you're reading the back of your seed packet. I'm trying to think, there's a couple of flowers you might plant in your garden that may say requires a 2-week period of cold stratification. So if that is the case for you, usually what I will do is either put those seeds in a wet paper towel inside a plastic bag, or sometimes I'll even put them in some potting mix or vermiculite in a plastic bag. And I put that in the back of my refrigerator for the allotted amount of time. So that just is mimicking the period of winter. And every species is different how long they might need cold stratification. Most of the things you guys are that we've been talking about, or all the things we've been talking about, don't require any stratification. But if you do read that on your seed packet, your refrigerator is a great place to do that. Also, if you're really, you can also just do it by putting things outside if it's cold enough in the winter. So sometimes when folks are starting native seeds from native plants from seed, they'll seed them in the fall, get them wet and moist, put them, literally just leave them outside all winter. And then as the spring warms up, they've already gotten their cold stratification, just like plants would in nature. Great question. Thank you.
And then I think, well, it's 8:17. So I just wanted to give everyone a big thank you for joining us for this couple of hours. We do have with your registration everybody's contact information, so we have emails for everyone. What we'll be doing is in the next few days, probably even early next week, we'll finally pull together all the different references we talked about today. So you'll get something about, you know, gardening with deer. You'll get something weeds to look out for in the spring, how to use compost with seed starting, and so on. You'll get that emailed to you along with the PowerPoint, and hopefully in that time a video of this.
Yeah, we just want to again give you a hearty thank you for being here with us, and just really appreciate everyone's enthusiasm for gardening. And don't hesitate to reach out to the Grow Line if you have questions. Our master gardeners are really happy to be helping you all, and that's what they're here for. And we'll be rolling out more classes every couple weeks. Mila and I are just going to put out a new class. We're really excited about everybody who's so excited about gardening, and we just want to keep you guys coming back for more. This is our favorite thing to do, is to share our love for gardening with all of you. So we're just really grateful you are here, and happy gardening to all of you.
Yeah, thank you and good night.
Thanks and good night.